Exorcisms have existed in various cultures and religions for millennia, but the practice became popular in the Catholic Church in the 15th century, with priests who would use the Latin phrase "vade retro satana," go back Satan, to expel demons from their mortal hosts. The practice of Catholic exorcism was codified in the Ritual Romanum, a book of Christian practices assembled in the 16th century. By the 1960s, exorcisms were very rare among Catholics. But that doesn't mean it never occurred, because in today's episode, we brought before you one of the most famous exorcism cases in the 20th century. Her name was Anneliese Michel, and her story would become the inspiration for several films. Not any films, horror films. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell to receive our latest notifications. Born on September 21, 1952 in Klingenberg, Germany, and was baptized the following day. Anneliese and her three sisters were raised in a strict Roman Catholic family. Her father Joseph had considered training as a priest, and three of her aunts were nuns. As a child, she was religious and went to Mass twice a week. Her mother Anna encouraged Anneliese and her sisters to atone for the sins of others. Anneliese's parents, Anna and Joseph Michel, were very religious. Before Anneliese was born, her mother Anna became disgraced by giving birth to an illegitimate child, a girl named Martha, and as a result, she suffered great shame and she was forced to wear a black veil as a punishment on her wedding day. After her first legitimate daughter Anneliese was born, Anna began to slowly but steadily impose on the girl the idea of praying for her mother's sins through religious devotion. When Martha died during surgery in 1956, Anna Michel became even more assertive in her attempts to push Anneliese into religious practices. Anneliese had some health issues as a child, contracting mumps, measles and scarlet fever before the age of 5. But otherwise, she was a good student liked by her teachers, who grew up to become a caring and kind young woman. In her teen years, she slept on a bare stone floor to atone for the sins of wayward priests and drug addicts, and other damned souls. Things started to become serious in September 1968, around the time of her birthday. While she was sitting with some of her friends, she suddenly lost consciousness and began walking around dazed. Though Anneliese did not remember the event, her friends and family said she was in a trance-like state. She passed off the incident as being overexhausted, but later that night she woke from her sleep feeling unable to move or talk, as if something is pinning her to bed. This lasted only for a while, but it had a great impact on Anneliese and she remained terrified for a few days, but she recovered a little by little. By August 1969, almost a year after the first incident, a similar one occurred when Anneliese experienced another blackout during the day and sleep paralysis during the night. This time, after she told her mother, they went and visited the family's physician, who referred them to another neurologist, who diagnosed it as likely a case of cerebral seizures with symptoms of grand mal epilepsy. Anneliese would later go back to school, but shortly after, her health would decline again, that she was eventually moved to hospital in 1970, and then to a clinic next month and saw other neurologists there as well. During the process, Anneliese became more religious, and by the time she got back home later that year, her personality had completely changed. She began seeing visions of ghastly demonic faces, and other times she smelled a horrible stench akin to burning fecal matter. These experiences slowly turned Anneliese into a withdrawn and depressed girl. When she went back to school, her grades deteriorated as she suffered brief moments of unconsciousness, and the seizure in June 1972. She continued to see the demonic faces, eventually decided to tell her parents about them, as well as saying that she heard voices claiming that she would be damned to hell, and even started hearing knocking sounds in her room, sounds that her sisters heard too. Even with all of that, She graduated from high school in 1973 and enrolled at Germany's University of Würzburg. After classes were finished, her classmates and other fellow students went to parties to have fun, but the young woman stayed in her room praying. While her peers were thinking that she is simply over-religious and over-conservative, the girl was doing her best to hide her suffering, feeling as if she is followed by the devil step by step, horrifying her with the prospect of rotting in hell. In September 1973, she met the neurologist Dr. Luthi, who advised her to see a Jesuit, a religious official, and in November of the same year, Anneliese met with a Freudian psychiatrist who diagnosed her as neuritis with possible epilepsy. However, the drugs she was given failed to help her, and as the year progressed, her condition began to deteriorate more. Though she was still taking her medication, Anneliese began to believe that she was possessed by a demon and that medicine cannot help in her case. Seeing this, Anneliese's mother was rattled and was advised to consult a Jesuit. Her mother was further rattled when she saw her furiously staring at a statue of the Virgin Mary with eyes of black, jet black, as her mother described. Over the next few months that followed, her mental and physical state deteriorated. She began to eat flies, spiders, and coal. She even bit off the head of a dead bird. She could often be heard screaming through the walls for hours. Tearing off her clothes and urinating on the floor became a regular occurrence. Michel and her family, as well as her community, became convinced that Anneliese is possessed and consulted several priests, asking for an exorcism. After much searching, the family found priest Ernest Alt, who convinced local Bishop Joseph Stengel, to approve another priest, Arnold Renz, to perform an exorcism. The one condition, it must be performed in absolute secrecy. During the exorcism sessions, Anneliese claimed in a demonic voice that there were 6 demons inside her, named Lucifer, Cain, Judas Iscariot, and Hitler. Interestingly, she named Valentin Fleischmann as one of her demons and provided accurate details of the real Fleischmann, who was a priest in the 15th century and was kicked out of the church for bad behavior. All these spirits would jostle for power of Anneliese's body and would communicate from her mouth with a low growl.
Ja. Fast.
As time went on, the situation grew even worse, banging her head against the wall and biting herself and others to the point where her family had to tie her up to prevent her from hurting herself. Over the next 10 months, Alt and Renz conducted 67 exorcisms, lasting up to 4 hours, with 1 or 2 exorcism sessions held each week on Anneliese's fragile body and mind. She also broke the bones and ripped the tendons in her knees from continually kneeling in prayer in an effort to exorcise the demons. By this stage, her parents had stopped all medical consultations to treat their daughter and relied solely on the church for healing. Anneliese began slowly starving herself and finally stopped eating. After several rites of exorcism, Anneliese weighed just 68 pounds and was extremely weak. During the final attempt to drive out the demons, her parents had to carry her around. The girl eventually died on July the 1st of dehydration and undernourishment, enhanced by pneumonia. "Mother, I'm afraid," Anneliese said to her mother and closed her eyes forever at the age of 23. It was found that her death could have been prevented even 1 week before, which is why her parents and priests Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz were charged in relation to it. At the trial, the defense played audio recordings of what they claimed were demons speaking during the exorcisms, but they were not enough to convince the court. The priests were found guilty of neglect and manslaughter and were sentenced to a suspended 6 months in jail. Her parents were charged as well and later exempted from punishment under German sentencing law, which stipulated their suffering from losing their daughter was enough. According to some scholars, Anneliese Michel's unfortunate ordeal was a case of misidentification of mental illness. Steadfast believers have disagreed with this, even turning Michel's gravestone into a place of pilgrimage. Other than her inspiration for a horror film, Anneliese became an icon for some Catholics who felt modern, secular interpretations of the Bible were distorting the ancient supernatural truth it contains. In brief, Michel was a German woman born in 1952 who passed away in 1976 at the young age of 23. Beginning in 1968, she began having blackouts and walking around seemingly in a trance. Her behavior became more and more unhinged as she participated in disturbing activities. Eventually, she'd receive an exorcism after other medical interventions failed to solve anything. She underwent 67 exorcisms, a grueling practice. She starved herself and refused medical attention to atone for her sins. This sums it up and brings us to the end of today's episode. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel and hit that bell to receive our latest notifications. See you in the next one. Take care.